Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Across the world and to every corner of the globe, wherever you are listening, welcome to the first episode of the Prosecutors Podcast. Hello, everybody. This is Brett and Alice welcoming you to the very first episode ever of the Prosecutors Podcast. Whether you're here with us at the beginning or joining us years down the line, if we make it that far, we want to thank you for your support.
Oftentimes, these podcasts dive straight into a case and you don't know anything about the person you're hearing from. So I guess maybe I'm being a little presumptuous that anyone wants to know anything about me, but I thought we'd introduce ourselves, get to know each other a little before we dive into a case.
I think that's a great idea.
So Brett, tell us about you.
So as you can probably tell, I'm from the South originally. I am a lawyer. I went to Harvard Law School. Since then, I've worked in a lot of different jobs. I've worked for the state. I've worked for the federal government. I've clerked for judges. I've worked in private practice. I've seen the law from a lot of different views before becoming a prosecutor. And hopefully that experience will be something that I can bring to bear to this podcast and to the cases we're going to talk about. What about you, Alice?
So I'm also a prosecutor and also an attorney. I had no idea I wanted to be a lawyer at all. In fact, all of my college roommates were taking the LSAT our senior year of college, and I shunned it. I was like, that's not for me. Definitely not going to law school. And then clearly I did. And my family doesn't have any lawyers in it, and they knew so little about the law. I should also note that my parents are immigrants, so they're not as well versed in the American education system. So when I called my mom to tell her I got into law school and that it was Yale, she quickly hung up the phone, and I thought that was a little bit strange. And I called her back about an hour later, and I said, "Is everything okay? I thought you'd be a little bit proud of me." And she said, "I thought you said you got into jail." It's not jail, and that's a real story. So, Mom, I didn't get into jail, but our jobs do put people into jail sometimes now.
Yeah, it's funny. When I don't have any family who are lawyers either. And so when I got into Harvard, I thought my parents would be excited, and they were just concerned about how much it was going to cost, which was a legitimate concern. And now over a decade later, I'm still repaying my student loans. So I understand that. But yeah, it's a different world from the one we grew up in.
One more story. You can cut this if you want. So I ended up marrying someone I went to law school with. So they also went to Yale. And when I told my dad, who is not from the United States, that I was dating someone from my law school, he looked at me really seriously and he said, "Is he employable?" Like a good dad, he just wanted to look out for me. So to say my family didn't quite know much about the legal world is an understatement.
I'm also married to a lawyer now, so we're just awash in lawyers. But we'll try and not annoy you with that during the podcast. I know everybody hates lawyers and they hate people who go to places like Harvard and Yale, but I'd like to think we're different from your average bear.
I'm from Texas and very proud of it. And I have nothing more to say about that.
What part of Texas are you from?
So I grew up in Austin, Texas, which was a really fun place to grow up because it wasn't hip back in the day. People didn't have their bachelor parties there. It was straight up a kind of a hippie place to grow up. There was music everywhere, good food, lots of breakfast tacos. And unfortunately, I don't live there anymore, but I still do visit and raise my fist at all the traffic based on all the people who have moved there to be hip.
I grew up in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't hip either, and people still don't go there for their bachelor parties. I got started in true crime, I guess, when I read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which I think a lot of people would say. That's really the first true crime book. It's famous both for its factual basis and for the fact that Truman Capote kind of embellished things as he went along. So it's not clear exactly what's true and what's false, which is true of all true crime. I love documentaries. I love true crime documentaries, and I love mysteries. It's one of the reasons I enjoy our job. I like having a question and trying to get to the bottom of it and trying to figure out how things happened and what order they happened, what the evidence adds up to. You know, one of the interesting things about being a prosecutor, we like to say this, some defense attorneys don't agree with it, we always get to wear the white hat. So we don't have to prosecute anybody. And if we decide that you're innocent, you know, we don't just pursue that case for another conviction or for another stat. We're duty bound to let it go. So if we look at the evidence and it adds up to you're innocent, we're not going to charge you. We're not going to pursue that. And I like that.
And to even go further than that, we don't have to look at a case and determine the person's innocent, even if we think that a crime has been committed by the person that we're investigating, but we don't have the evidence, we don't bring the case. And I think that's really interesting because we're forced to look through the rules of evidence and have principles in how we pursue cases, which again may be unsatisfying, but that's what we're bound by, and it's the duty we have to the public.
And you see that in a lot of true crime cases. There are people who would say that in the Stephen Avery case, or the Adnan Syed case, or the West Memphis 3, that, yeah, they probably did it, but there's not enough evidence to convict. And we see that as prosecutors as well. So what about you, Alice? What got you interested in true crime?
Well, the truth is, so Brett and I talk about true crime a lot. It's mostly Brett telling me interesting cold cases and me staring in bewilderment that these cases exist. It's very fun. But even though we talked about doing a podcast for a while, we didn't move on it for quite some time. And it wasn't until I had a newborn and wasn't sleeping anyways and spent all hours of the night reading true crime blogs and websites and watching documentaries that I decided, why not just start talking about it? You know, Brett and I talk about this all the time in our real jobs and also in leisure, talking about cold cases. And we thought maybe you'd like to join along.
And just to add some historical import to this podcast, we've been talking about doing this for a while. And we've been working on it for several months. And then all of a sudden, we basically had to stop because of the coronavirus, which is still ongoing at this time. Hopefully, by the time you're listening to it, that's over. We've moved on. So we've been in quarantine for the last 3 weeks. And we finally decided that neither one of us have it. So we can be in a room together and record our podcast. So we are, I guess, 4 feet apart. So we're not as far as we're supposed to be. But I'm pretty sure you can't get coronavirus from someone who doesn't have it. So we're going to attempt this and see how it goes.
So if there's a sudden stop, perhaps there's been a shelter-in-place order somewhere.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So Brett and I have talked about doing this podcast for a really long time. And really the holdup has been me. Brett is ready to go. And I just kept thinking, who has time? Because we're still real live, prosecutors on a day job. But then I thought, once I had a baby and had literally zero time, why not start a podcast now?
Hey, once all that sweet, sweet HelloFresh money starts rolling in, you'll be able to retire from prosecuting.
And I also have a toddler who is an irrational human being. And I really resonate with a lot of these cases where people act irrationally. And the commenters often say, why would anyone act that way? And I think they must have never lived with a toddler.
I have a 6-month-old, and she's very sweet right now.
She's the best.
She's the best. She's the best. I'm sure in a year and a half, when she's in her terrible twos, I'll be bringing some of my evaluations of human action and irrationality into the podcast as well. But for now, we'll depend on you for that.
Oh, thanks. Or is he the most rational because he gets everything he wants?
That's a good point.
So we'll have to see.
I mean, what is rationality, right?
Who decides what it is? None of us act exactly as someone else would expect is rational.
And God, you see that in every one of these cases. People are always trying to analyze why somebody says the thing they did, or why they acted the way they did, or why they cried, or why they didn't cry. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to do some of that, but it's kind of a fool's errand to try and figure out why people have the emotional response they have unless you have some evidence to tie it to.
And that's when you're in your right mind. People react differently when they're under the influence, whether of alcohol or drugs. I mean, alcohol influences me differently than probably you, Brett. Most likely.
That's right.
And so when you're trying to explain why someone who's under the influence acts a certain way, that is just very much a fruitless exercise, I think.
And, that's really where I think some of you guys can come in, because we've actually done drugs. So I may need some help on that at some point when we're talking about
Not
people.
to do drugs. Just
don't do drugs. But if you've done drugs in the past and you have some relevant life experience that you can share with us in these cases where we're pretty sure people were on drugs, hey, that can be helpful. And between us, we have more than 20 years of legal experience. And we're going to try and bring all that to bear in this podcast. And that includes investigating cases. It includes looking at evidence. It includes working with law enforcement, different agencies, federal agencies, state agencies, how they do cases, how they look at evidence. It includes evaluating witnesses, evaluating statements, determining when someone's lying and when they're telling the truth. All things that I think are critically important if we're going to bring any light to these cases we're going to look at.
Brett and I have the fun job of getting to talk to witnesses sometimes. So we really get to see how people act under pressure when they're being interrogated. And I think that will be an interesting view to bring when we look at some of these videotaped confessions or witness interviews.
And we've also had the experience of having people just lie to our face, just lie, which is always
the time.
It's shocking. It's shocking when it happens, when you know someone's lying, and you just have to do the best you can.
Not everyone's afraid of repercussions.
Nope. Particularly if they're already involved in criminal enterprises.
So we're going to be releasing, 1 to 2 episodes a week so that we help you manage your bingeability of this show, because I get really sad when I watch an entire show in one night and I have nothing else to watch the next day. So we'll help you binge with about 1 to 2 episodes a week, but won't overload you.
And just so you know that it's not all about you, we also are doing this podcast by ourselves. You know how you hear some of those podcasts where at the end they list 20 different people, they have 3 writers, they have 2 producers, a director, a sound guy, a music guy, and everything else, editors, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have any of that. It's just the 2 of us. So 2 episodes a week is probably the most we can manage. We'll see how it goes. And then we also want to have feedback episodes, because one thing I've noticed about a lot of true crime podcasts, and I'm not really sure why this is true, but they never do listener feedback. And if they do it, it's once a year or so. But we don't want to do that. We want to hear what you guys are thinking. We want to hear what you like, what you hate. We want to hear your theories. And basically, if you want to get in touch with us, it's pretty easy. We have a website, prosecutorspodcast.com. We also are on Instagram and Twitter at prosecutorspod for both. And we have a Gmail account, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. So email us, hit us up, follow us, like us. You don't have to give us money or anything, but we would like to hear from you.
Yes, please talk to us so that Brett and I don't just have to talk to each other.
Exactly. In this time of Corona, Alice is the only friend I have, but eventually I'm sure we'll get tired of each other.
Impossible, Brett. Impossible.
And that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this podcast, because both of us love true crime. We listen to true crime. It's something we're passionate about.
We really do. We really do true crime every day.
That's right. And essentially, we live this stuff. We do true crime every day, like Alice said. We've seen how these investigations are done. We work with investigative agencies. And if you listen to most true crime podcasts, essentially what they're doing is they're walking through that investigation. And one of the things we noticed is people often have questions, or they don't understand why things happen the way they did. And we're not broadcasters, as is evident from this episode and probably from all episodes to come, but we are lawyers and we do know this stuff. So we thought we could bring a unique perspective and not just be yet another true crime podcast talking about the same cases everybody's heard before.
So we're not saying that we know exactly what the law enforcement officers or the prosecutors in those cases were thinking, because of course we can't get in their heads. But we do know the framework and also kind of the legal standards that they have to meet. That's universal within criminal law. And so that's the perspective we're bringing. What is a framework that they're working under? Now, of course, each mind works differently and we don't purport to know what they're thinking. But we do think that by bringing our framework of the law, we can shed light where we haven't been able to glean from other podcasts.
And we're not going to talk about cases that we handle. We're not going to talk about cases that come from our area or our agency. Our employers don't mind us doing this podcast, but they would probably fire us quickly if we did that. So we're not going to do that. But we are going to talk about cold cases. We're going to talk about cases that you've heard about and hopefully cases that you haven't. And we hope that by bringing this unique perspective, we can shed some light on these cases. I think sometimes people think they're going to start a true crime podcast and solve cold cases that haven't been solved for 15 years. And in reality, the only way those cases will ever be solved is if people keep talking about them. They keep shining a spotlight on them. In almost every case, somebody knows something. And it's really about getting that person to talk more than anything. So that's what we hope to accomplish.
So, Brett, can you tell us a little bit about what people can expect from this podcast?
Well, the way we're going to do it, we want to have a show that lasts 45 minutes to an hour. That's the length we're going to shoot for. Now, obviously, a lot of cases cannot be discussed in 45 minutes or an hour. And so if that's the case, we'll break them into multiple episodes. If a case takes 2 episodes, we'll do 2 episodes a week. If it's going to take more than that, we'll go into the next week. And then every now and then, probably every couple weeks, but maybe more if we have more questions, we'll do sort of a response show where we answer your questions and address your concerns and maybe talk about your theories about the cases. So that's what we're looking to do. All right. So one thing we wanted to talk about in this first show, this opening show of the Prosecutors Podcast, is the framework that we're going to use to address these cases. And we wanted to kind of reference something we do in the law. So if you're a lawyer and you've ever dealt with statutes, you know that neither Congress nor state legislatures are very good at writing them. And in fact, they're often impossible to understand. So figuring out what a statute means is kind of like a true crime episode where you're using the evidence you have to figure things out. And in the law, legal nerds such as ourselves talk about the canons of construction. So I'll let our Yale graduate explain what those are.
Actually, please don't, because I can't pronounce these correctly. And that's true. My professors couldn't pronounce them, and I can't pronounce them.
They're all Latin, because why not? The first one, I'll give it a shot. Or we're just going to use one as an example. We're not going to go through every canon of construction and bore you to death and make you leave before we even get to the first case. And this is a famous one. Expressio unius est exclusio alterius. How was that?
That was better than I've ever heard in a classroom.
And what that means is the express mention of one thing excludes all others. So the famous example of that is dogs, cats, and horses are not allowed in the park. And since the statute specifically tells you that dogs, cats, and horses are not allowed in the park, other animals are. So if you want to bring a sheep, you can bring a sheep. Now, people criticize the canons all the time, and they say there's a counter canon for every canon. One of the counter canons is that sometimes specific things are listed by way of example. And since you can't bring a dog, and you can't bring a cat, and you can't bring a horse, you actually can't bring a sheep either. So we're going to go through our framework, but I want you to understand that while we're going to lay out these 10 rules about the way we're going to approach cases, they're not exclusive, they're not ironclad, and there will be times, maybe very often, that we vary from them.
And part of the reason we came up with these rules of interpretation is because we'd like to try and stay principled. I think it's easy sometimes when you talk about an exciting case to just go down a bunch of rabbit holes that's not actually helpful to the listener for learning about the case or in shedding new light on a case that's been talked about a lot. And so we hope to keep ourselves principled and also so that the listeners know where we're coming from each time and can call us out if they feel like it. But like Brett said, these will be broken at times. So.
Yeah, these rules really set us up to be criticized because we are going to break them and you guys are going to let us know when we do that. And so I look forward to that. So do you want me to start or do you want to start?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So the first rule, the simplest answer is the most likely to be correct. Now, you've heard this 1,000 times. It's basically Occam's razor. And I think you can apply it to most true crime cases. It's probably not aliens. Maybe it is, but it's probably not.
And it's not very satisfying sometimes. But because our job as prosecutors really is to try and get the case right, we're going to try to bring that principle here to the true crime world as well.
And if you work in the law, you know how true this is. I had the experience to work in state prosecution once. And one of the things we dealt with were a lot of death penalty cases. And the thing that always surprised me, and this is disturbing, is it doesn't take much for someone to kill someone else. You think there's going to be this big motive. You think there must be a really good reason, but oftentimes there's not. Oftentimes it is just a robbery that went wrong. Or it is just a spouse who got tired of being married and didn't want to go through the hassle of getting divorced. You see that all the time. And I think with these cases, even though they are famous and they are examined extensively, oftentimes, like Alice said earlier, people go down these rabbit holes, and the rabbit holes are not helpful. And the rabbit holes distract you from the evidence and the facts that you can use to determine what actually happened. So that's number one.
Our second rule is that if there's no evidence of a crime, there probably wasn't a crime. And we know this from personal experience because crimes are messy. It's really hard not to leave behind evidence that points to the existence of a crime. Whether this is being caught on camera or someone overhearing something, someone seeing something. We live in society where there are a lot of people with ears and eyes at all hours of the day. It's hard not to leave behind DNA, a stray hair, your fingerprint. So kind of like the Occam's razor rule, if we don't see evidence of a crime, there probably wasn't one.
The third one, and this is probably going to be controversial with some people, but usually law enforcement can be trusted. You're not going to see that many cases with dirty cops or with cops who are murdering people or kidnapping people or covering up a crime. It just doesn't happen that often. And we can say that from personal experience as well.
The fourth rule is that conspiracies are hard to pull off and even harder to keep secret. If more than one person knows a secret, it really likely will leak at some point. And I know there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there in general because they're fun to think about, they're fun to talk about, but in practicality, conspiracies usually are difficult to pull off.
And you see that in some cases where people insist that 2 or 3 or 4 or a whole host of people are involved in a crime. And keeping anything like that secret is going to be difficult. It's especially going to be difficult in cases like the ones we look at, where there's a lot of media attention, there's a lot of investigation. Usually somebody's going to crack. They're going to talk. Even if they don't talk to the police, they're going to talk to somebody else, and that person's going to talk to the police. So I'm not saying conspiracies don't happen. They do happen, but usually people find out about them.
And Brett and I see this in our real life cases. When you have multiple defendants, usually you'll see this in almost all cases. A lot of people plea, and the last man standing kind of gets the harshest sentence because no one wants to be the last one to crack. So there's an incentive for people to talk earlier on.
Right. It's the old prisoner's dilemma. They call it the prisoner's dilemma for a reason. And I will tell you, one of the most shocking things we see, and we do see it occasionally, are cases where we're pretty sure that multiple people are involved or multiple people have knowledge, and yet they don't tell us. That is always really surprising because typically somebody is going to talk. So conspiracies, they happen, but they're probably not going to be the answer most of the time. So number 5, and I think this one's really important, and this also goes along with the law enforcement point we made earlier. Do not mistake incompetence for malice. If what happened can be attributed to a screw-up, it was probably a screw-up.
Remember, law enforcements are bureaucracies. There's a lot of red tape. So oftentimes I'll hear in the news people saying, if the cops have nothing to hide, there would be a body camera footage of what happened. Sometimes body cameras aren't turned on by accident. Footage is lost. It gets lost in a vault of, hundreds of hours of body camera videos. And we really do see that is due to incompetence or bureaucracy rather than malice.
And I think if you think about the cases we're going to be looking at, these cases are famous for a reason. These are the cases that haven't been solved. And I will tell you, the thread that seems to go through most unsolved crimes is incompetence. It's somebody made a mistake early on. Maybe they didn't realize it was as serious as it was. And maybe the mistake was perfectly innocent. They had no reason to think it was as serious as it was. But because they made that decision, evidence is lost. And really, you can never get that back. There's an old saying that most crimes are solved within the first 48 hours, particularly violent crimes, murders, that kind of thing. And that's true. And if you lose that time, if you lose the first 48 hours, you can never get that back. And it doesn't matter how much we pore over documents and how many theories we have on web sleuths. If you lose it, you've lost it. But usually that's incompetence, not malice.
So the sixth rule: there's never going to be a theory that answers all the questions or addresses all the evidence. Especially for the cases we're going to look at, that's going to be very true. Otherwise, they would probably be solved at this point.
And this kind of goes back to the idea that crime is messy. And people's lives are messy. If you think about, and maybe I don't recommend thinking about this too often, but if you think about if you were murdered today, or if you just vanished off the face of the earth, all the strange things in your home that somebody who doesn't know you and doesn't know your routine and doesn't know why you did the things that you do would find. And a good example of this, a famous example of this, are a pair of glasses in the Manson case. If you've read Helter Skelter, you know about this. There was a pair of glasses. I think they were a pair of sunglasses, but they might have been a pair of eyeglasses that were found at the Tate residence. And the police could never tie those glasses to any of the victims. And it turned out that they couldn't tie it to anyone in the Manson family either. And so Charlie Manson, for years, would claim that those glasses were evidence that he was innocent because can't account for the glasses, couldn't have been us. In reality, we don't know where those glasses came from. We never will. But that doesn't undermine the fact that Charlie Manson and the Manson family killed the people at the Tate residence. And you're going to see that in every case.
Brett, do you have any weird habits that would look weird if you disappeared?
Oh, I have so many weird habits. I don't know if the audience knows me well enough at this point for me to really get into some of those things. But yeah, I think if I ended up dead, there would be some weird stuff.
All right, that'll be for a Q&A further down the line. We're holding you to it. We want to know how weird you are.
So the next one, number 7, is we never know all the facts. And by we, I mean those of us in the podcasting community, those of us in the true crime community. We usually know what's been released to us by the police, and that's it. And so sometimes you'll have questions that are answered in the police file, and for whatever reason, it's not released. And I'll tell you, one of the things that we see, there's something called holdback evidence. The police, typically, there are certain facts they are not going to release to the public. And the idea is if they arrest somebody and that person knows those facts, they know that they did it. So take in the Ramsey case, there's a famous incident where 10 years after JonBenet Ramsey was killed, a man confessed. Well, he didn't do it. And one of the ways you can determine that he didn't do it is you look at his confession, you see what he says, you compare it to the evidence you have that he doesn't know about, and you can exclude him. So police are always going to withhold things. We're never going to have everything, and we just have to do the best we can with what we have.
And oftentimes, especially with these cold cases that are unsolved, sometimes evidence is not released because there's an open investigation. There may be people involved in that investigation who are targets or suspects who are part of a different investigation that have nothing to do with the case at hand. That's another reason to hold back evidence as well. So the law enforcement community has a reason for holding back evidence at times for their legitimate purposes. But of course, it hinders our ability in the public to understand a case fully.
And I get it. It's frustrating when you've got a case that's been open for 15 years and you think, hey guys, maybe we just need to lay it out on the table and see what we can find out if we're ever going to solve this case. But police departments have their reasons. They have their policies, and those policies are grounded on solid basis.
Rule number 8. This is in line with some of our previous rules as well. But the most obvious suspect is usually the one who did it. And that's partly because crime is just less sexy in real life than it is on television. So we're going to abide by that and not just pull off some random person who there's no evidence pointing to them being involved in the crime.
And everybody's heard the idea that if somebody's killed, it was probably their spouse who did it. It was probably the boyfriend who did it. And that goes to this. If a child's killed, often, unfortunately, it's the parents. And so that's the first place you look. It doesn't mean those people necessarily did it, but it is the most likely answer. Number 9, people lie, but that doesn't make them liars. And I will tell you, I think this is the one that confuses people more than anything else. And there's a reason for it, because we think when somebody lies, they're a liar, they can't be trusted. And as prosecutors, we use that all the time. You know, when you've got somebody on the stand and you want to challenge their credibility, you point to somewhere they lied. And you basically tell the jury, defense attorneys do this too, you basically tell the jury, hey, look, he lied about fact X. So therefore, this whole cockamamie story he's told you about this drug conspiracy or whatever is also a lie. But in reality, people lie all the time, and they lie for their own reasons. And sometimes it's not so much they're lying as they want to distance themselves from this thing. They're talking to the police. They were involved in something heinous. They want to limit their culpability. So what you often see in things like confessions, and you see this in a lot of famous true crime cases, people will say they left. So this is very common. I was there, they started killing those people, and I got out of there, right? Because they don't want the police to think they're the kind of people who would continue to take part in a murder or a crime. And then it's proven that they didn't leave, and that cast out on the entire confession. Or they just say crazy things that don't make any sense and don't fit with the facts on the ground. And determining what's true and what's a lie is very difficult. And the only way to do it is to use the evidence you have and compare it to what you're being told. And anybody who tells you, oh, you can tell if they're lying because they looked this way or because they blinked too many times or whatever. I mean, those people are full of it. Don't believe that. You know, there are a couple things where you can see when somebody's probably trying to mislead you. One of the most famous is you ask a specific question and you get a general answer, right? And this kind of goes to this whole idea. They're trying to limit their involvement. They're trying to push themselves away from the crime. But by doing that, they're actually showing you that they probably know more than they're telling you.
You know, this rule that people lie, but that doesn't make them liars, is what recognized by the court system as well. So if you go to trial, oftentimes the court will instruct the jurors that just because there are inconsistencies in someone's testimony doesn't mean you need to discount everything they say. Obviously, you can take it into account, but that itself doesn't make all of the testimony worthless. And that's from the court.
And that's a really great point. And I think don't underestimate when people's stories change. Sometimes it's because they've thought about things. Sometimes it's because they've learned other things. You know, we are going to talk about a lot of famous cases that weren't famous at the time. So when someone makes a 911 call at the very beginning of a case and they say something and then later on they change their story, it could have just been they weren't being that careful because they didn't realize this was a big deal. And you see that a lot, and we'll see that in some of our cases.
And last but not least, because this is how we are going to fall back on when you guys call us out on breaking our own rules, is that the cases we're looking at are extraordinary cases. So in extraordinary cases, expect the extraordinary. Exactly.
So one of the things people always say, you know, we'll look at some missing person cases. We'll look at Maura Murray, for instance. And one of the things people say about Maura Murray is, well, it probably wasn't a serial killer. Because what are the chances? What are the chances that you just happen to be broken down on the side of the road and a serial killer drives by and you get in the car? And that's true. What are the chances? But, you know, if in the 1970s you were on the Pacific Northwest and you were hitchhiking, what are the chances that guy in the yellow Beetle that's slowing down is a serial killer, and then you get in the car with Ted Bundy? So it does happen, and these cases are unsolved for a reason. And we are definitely going to see some extraordinary things. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for today. Thank you guys for joining us on this adventure. Hopefully we'll get better at this as we go. One of the things people tend to do in podcasts is their early episodes just kind of disappear. We're not going to do that. You can listen to our foibles from now until forever. But until next time, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
Love it. And in fact, at graduation, each graduating class gets to vote on someone inspiring they want to hear from. Usually it's a Supreme Court justice or a great civil rights activist. My illustrious class voted for Monty the therapy dog, and that's a true story.
So did he speak?